Hello everyone, today I'm back with a new Doctor Who Top 10, and it's a sequel of sorts to my previous one, my Top 10 or 8 Regeneration stories, which I made in anticipation for the 12th Doctor's own swan song, which we will of course now be seeing later this year. So I thought I might as well follow this up with a Top 10 post-Regeneration stories list, i.e. a story that is set straight after a regeneration, or one that features a regeneration right at the start. But before I go on much further, let's just pause for a minute and take a look at my criteria for what I would perceive as the perfect post-regeneration story. So the first point I've got this time is that a Doctor's debut should be something of a fresh start for the show, so it needs the capacity to introduce new viewers to Doctor Who while not overloading them with too much information and mythology. There shouldn't be many references to past episodes or returning characters, although it is sometimes useful for a companion to be retained as a point of identification and security for the audience, while the new Doctor fully emerges. Like any story, a post-generation episode needs to have a solid plot, but one that isn't overly complicated, so to not put new viewers off. I particularly like it when the Doctor saves the day primarily by himself, making a statement to both the enemy and the audience, assuring them that he really is the Doctor. Finally, the post-generation trauma should be addressed and explored to a certain extent, but not excessively. It's extremely interesting to see the Doctor fully come to terms with his new body and personality throughout the story. And once again, in light of this criteria, I will be making a couple of omissions from my list, although with very good reason. Firstly, and perhaps most obviously, I won't be featuring an unearthly child, as while it is a Doctor debut of sorts, it opens up the whole show as opposed to just the first Doctor's era. It isn't an episode that takes place after a regeneration. Here I am particularly focusing on how a new Doctor reinvents the show, and of course Bill Hartnell, being the very first incarnation, doesn't do this in the same way as others. I've also decided not to include the twin dilemma, for the very simple reason that I have not actually seen it. However, from what I've heard of the story from many sources, I really don't think I'm missing much, and I seriously doubt it would change my ranking that much if I saw it, if at all. And last but not least, you will be finding Time in the Rani and the TV movie in this list, after I decided to exclude them from my top 10 regenerations, making it a top 8. It's not really hard to see why. While the stories do feature generations, they are more about setting up the subsequent Doctor, and so therefore count as Doctor debuts in my eyes. So with that all out of the way, without further ado, here are the 10 post-regeneration stories that I have seen, ranked. In 10th place, I've gone for the Christmas Invasion. And yes, I know this is a controversial one, but to put it simply, I've never really liked this story as either an episode or Christmas special, let alone a post-generation story. The truth is that I don't really find it very engaging, particularly with the Doctor in bed for half the story, only really emerging in the final act. I'm also not a fan of the early 10th Doctor in general, so even when he does make his entrance, I find it quite underwhelming, and I'm not really too fussed. But I just don't really think it has the intended impact, given that we'd already seen the 10th Doctor make an entrance at the end of The Parting of the Ways. Perhaps Series 1 ending with the 9th Doctor starting to regenerate, only for something to go wrong, forcing him to retreat to the Zero Room, could have had more potential for making the 10th Doctor's proper debut more impactful. He would then be seen for the first time on the Sycorax ship. I can't really pinpoint what other aspects of this one I'm not a fan of, but Tennant's lack of screen time is definitely a big factor. At number 9, it's Time and the Rani. Now before I go any further, I actually want to say that I really don't mind this one, as an episode in general that is. Like could be too strong a word, although I do find it a tremendously fun start to the 7th Doctor's era. Although it is let down in some areas, for example the special effects and costumes not being quite up to scratch, I can happily overlook these to really enjoy this story. I might actually develop these musings into a full Defending Time and the Rani video at some point in the future, but from a post-generation episode point of view, it fits my criteria quite well. I do quite like how the Doctor, still concussed from his regeneration, is unable to spot that his companion is in fact the Rani wearing a wig, but perhaps this is taking the concept of post-generation trauma a little too far for some people. I also can't but help love how the 7th Doctor himself is set up, with all his idioms, wits and spoon playing. In 8th place, I've put the 4th Doctor's opening story, Robot. Now, it's not really one that especially stands out to me, although it does have some good concepts involving the morals of robotics and free will. The introduction of Tom Baker's Doctor is definitely helped by the inclusion of Sarah Jane, the Brigadier, and Unit, who are retained from the previous story. The inclusion of Unit works particularly well, given that the organisation had been so prominent in the previous Doctor's era, and had even appeared in his regeneration episode, the previous story. The team is split up well, and Sarah Jane in particular getting a lot of screen time as she investigates Think Tank is a very welcome move, as the character was conceived as a journalist after all. Robot is definitely a decent story, but as I say, just not one that sticks in my mind as being standout special. In 7th place, we have the TV movie. I have actually already reviewed this story on the channel, but not in a post-regeneration story capacity. It is one of the few stories on this list that not only kickstarts a brand new Doctor, but also a brand new era for the show, or at least that was the plan. But as a debut for the 8th Doctor and his proposed era, the TV movie does actually get a lot right, gradually introducing the new viewer to elements of Doctor Who mythology, which are ingeniously written into the plot in a way which makes them integral to the story, and not just being there for the sake of it. Perhaps the most notable of these is the reintroduction of the Master. Although Eric Roberts' portrayal probably had the least impact on me out of all the Masters, making him the villain of the piece was definitely a clever move. In particular, the parallel between both him and the Doctor getting used to having a new body helps to establish a connection between them, even if they lack any real gritty material on screen together. The TV movie therefore works wonderfully as a post-regeneration story and introduction to Doctor Who. For number 6, I've chosen The Power of the Daleks, a story which I actually haven't had the pleasure of watching, but then I'm sure the majority of my viewers won't have either. On a serious note, I am of course referring to the recently released animated recreation of the story, which is the only version of it that I have actually been able to experience. I must say, it was a thoroughly fascinating experience watching Troughton's take on the Doctor unfold over the 6 instalments, and the equally engaging Dalek plot. In my opinion, the plot of this one is quite traditional in terms of Doctor Who, so simple enough for new viewers to follow, but also as an instant hit with fans. This aspect also enables the plot to take more of a backseat, giving plenty of space and time for Ben and Polly to accept they are still travelling with the same man. In the middle and latter parts, however, there is less emphasis on the Doctor and his changing personality, but then you can't expect the first post-generation story to be perfect in all areas. I do, however, still regard The Power of the Daleks as one of the strongest Doctor Who serials plot-wise. At number 5, it's the 5th Doctor's introductory story, Castor Valva. Even though the newly regenerated 5th Doctor doesn't really settle in properly until halfway through this story, it's fascinating to see his post-generation trauma unfold, and the Zero Room and Cabinet are great additions to both the story and the Doctor Who canon to facilitate this. In particular, I love the latter instalments, with the strange optical illusion that is Castor Valva, providing a perfect setting for a confused, recovering Doctor. The reoccurrence of block transfer computation is a genius move, really affirming the Keeper of Traken, Logopolis and Castrovalva as a neat little trilogy. The Master's presence also really adds weight to this story, with Anthony Ainley's incarnation in his element after a good few episodes in the role. Some of my favourite aspects of Castrovalva are his disguise as the Portreeve, and the revelation that the fireplace was his TARDIS all along. The ending is also extremely memorable, with Adric being set free after a chandelier destroys the Master's web. All these elements make Castrovalva really stand out as a classic Doctor Who story and Doctor debut for me. In 4th place, I've gone for Rose. It's not a story I actually witnessed on initial broadcast, although I can imagine what a colossal impact it would have had on both established fans and the whole new audiences back in 2005. Like the TV movie, this story not only had the job of introducing 9th Doctor to viewers, but also completely reinventing Doctor Who for the modern age, and it does both perfectly. I'm not a massive fan of Rose as a character overall, but still respect the decision Russell T Davies made to tell the whole story almost from her perspective as the companion, giving the new viewer an instant point of relation. And again, like the TV movie, it doesn't bombard new viewers with lots of information and mythology, saving some of these things for later use, later on in series 1 or 2 or whenever, and instead focuses on new concepts and characters for the most part. Although the enemy does in fact turn out to be a returning one from the classic series, in the form of the Autons and Nestine, the former is never named on screen, and has been reimagined enough almost to be seen as a completely new monster. Indeed, killer shop dummies work just as well in 2005 as they did in the 1970s, providing an alien foe that can satisfy both old viewers and new ones alike. This is just one element that embodies why Rose is such an excellent start to revive Doctor Who. In 3rd place, I've put Spearhead from Space. In many ways, this has much in common with Rose, and essentially serves the same purpose of that story. Even though it hadn't been preceded by any real form of hiatus, it had the job of reinventing the show in 2 ways. Firstly, as a more contemporary, Earth-based affair, following the Doctor's exile to the planet that corresponded with his most recent regeneration. But this new vision is made even more radical in many ways, with the programme being broadcast in colour for the first time. The combination of these 2 elements makes Spearhead from Space almost unrecognisable as the previous Doctor Who story The War Games Part 10, and I adore it all the more for it. There's something about this brand new vision for the show that really just works, despite being so different from anything we'd seen before. I suppose that Pertwee's Doctor is the first incarnation to start off by himself, joined by no old companions, helping to make his debut feel really separate and fresh. Much like how we follow Rose in Rose, we follow the third Doctor as he forms an existence for himself on Earth, while at the same time preventing the first Auton invasion, gaining a new companion, and becoming UNIT's scientific advisor. Even though this organisation had appeared in Doctor Who once before, the only real constant in the invasion and Spearhead is the Brigadier, the only character to make the transition from black and white to colour, and even he seems like a very original, new character here. It really is a fantastic Doctor Who story, and is instrumental in kick-starting the third Doctor's highly successful and fondly remembered tenure, and Doctor Who in the 70s as a whole. In second place, I've put Deep Breath, which is only the second post-Regeneration story I've actually had the pleasure of watching on initial broadcast during my time as a fan of Doctor Who. As such, as well as my original criteria, another fact that comes into play with the placing of these top two stories is nostalgia, and Deep Breath will always hold a special place in my heart for very personal reasons, not least for introducing my favourite incarnation of the Doctor, but for also providing me with a point of identification and comfort as I gradually adjusted to living in a brand new area following my first ever house move. Of course, from a technical point of view, I thoroughly enjoy how the inclusion of the half-faced man ties into the theme of identity, and how he is a metaphor for someone that constantly changes, as the 11th Doctor reminds us that we all are, shortly before he bows out. It's also great to see the Paternoster Row gang again, and the backdrop of Victorian London really is the icing on the cake. Although I wasn't quite as big a fan of this story on first watch, after multiple rewatches, I really can't imagine Capaldi's Doctor being introduced in any other way. And in first place, what other story could it be? For many fans, the 11th Hour generates not only the Doctor, but the whole format of the show. Stephen Moffat's more magical, whimsical fairy tale approach couldn't contrast more with Russell T Davies' very domestic, down-to-earth style, but this only makes the 11th Hour a more memorable, stand-out Doctor debut in its own right. As a 9-year-old, I remember being completely absorbed by the start of a brand new era, and indeed, as the first proper jumping on point since I'd become a fan in 2008, it allowed me to take a real sense of ownership of the show, and become fully invested in Matt Smith's whimsical portrayal of the Doctor, along with Amy and Rory. The plot is also extremely tight, culminating in a fantastic I am the Doctor moment from this new incarnation. There are also subtle, but genius references to what is to come later down the line in the 11th Doctor's time on the show, with the inclusion of references to the Pandorica and the Silence, creating a very rewarding viewing experience to both viewers of just Series 5, with the Pandorica being paid off in the finale, and fans who are patient enough to wait until the 11th Doctor's regeneration story for full answers about the Silence. Either way, as a fan or a casual viewer, you can't really go wrong with the 11th Hour, and I definitely think it works for a broader audience. Overall, a terrific opening episode for the 11th Doctor, and Moffat's era of Doctor Who. So there we have it, my top 10 post-Regeneration stories from Doctor Who. Let me know your lists in the comments below. It'll be very interesting to see if you agree with me or disagree, and I'm happy to have any debates or discussions with you about the placing of these stories. Also, just a quick note to say thank you so much for 900 subscribers. Not really a big milestone in its own right, but I am now very aware that I'm likely basically to hit 1,000 subscribers in the very near future, which initially kind of made me a bit nervous because obviously I need to do some kind of special video for that. But since then, I have come up with a plan for what I'm going to do. It's something that's hopefully a bit different and kind of more exclusive and unique, and I can't wait to share it with you when I do eventually hit that milestone. But in the meantime, existing subscribers, please help get the word out, help me reach that goal, and if you're a new viewer as well, watching this as the first video on my channel, please do subscribe and help me to get to 1,000, and then, well, I suppose it'll give me less time to make this special, but, it'll help me reach the goal quicker, so, yeah, that's good, I suppose. But anyway, yes, on a serious note, if you can help me get there, that would be great, and I can't wait to show you what I've got in store. Thank you so much for watching this video, guys, and I'll see you very soon for the next one. Bye for now.